You find something that you already have, and that's also common to Eckankar, is that we're already spiritual beings. We don't have to become something that we're not now. You know, in like just in discussion or conversation, it's not uncommon to hear someone say, "Oh, so and so is very spiritual," or "Oh, I'm not spiritual." Well, in fact, everybody is 100% spiritual.
Welcome to the Rich Life Realization Podcast. This is your host, Rich Life. Yes, that's really my name. And we're going to explore powerful conversations with phenomenal guests in order to spark realizations and insights that guide you toward enriching your life. Well, I have a special guest with me here today on the Rich Life Realization Podcast. Welcome to Chris Gage. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be a guest on your podcast. You and I met recently at the a New Age fair or expo, and had a good conversation, and glad to follow that up.
Yes, beautiful. And we will be discussing a spiritual understanding today. Chris is a practitioner of Eckankar. It's a spiritual practice. And we had a lot in common because I study the philosophical teachings of Sydney Banks, or the three principles. And so we'll talk about similarities, we'll talk about differences, and we'll have some fun today.
Great. Well, I would like to mention up front that I am not an official spokesperson for Eckankar.
Sure.
I've been a member of this organization for my entire adult life, so I feel pretty confident or comfortable of my familiarity with it, but my understandings are my own, and so just want to make that point that I'm not an official representative. But I got involved in Eckankar in the 1970s, actually. I went through a period of my life where I was experimenting with different spiritual approaches. Some of those experiments involved recreational drugs, which I then subsequently gave up and have not really been involved with for the last 45 or 50 years. But at the time, that was part of my life experience. What I found was I was familiar with the drug experience, but it kind of booted me into other experiences that I was not really necessarily prepared for, didn't have any real understanding of. And it put me on a quest to attain a better understanding of what was going on in my experience. So I started reading Eastern teachings, Hinduism and Buddhism and some others, with the idea that my own background, which I'd been exposed to Christianity as a kid, and went to church and everything, but that didn't really seem to be for me a source that I could go to for greater insight into the experiences I was having. So I enjoyed the readings that I did, and found some of them very valuable, but they didn't quite hit it for me. I found that the traditional scriptures for me were couched in a lot of symbolism, and it didn't seem like real direct, actionable content that I was looking for, or a clear explanation of my experience. So in that phase, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but at one point I had a very vivid dream experience, which was unlike other dreams I'd ever had. In the dream, I was walking in a procession of people through a mountainous area, and there were guides present who were directing us to a building that was in the distance, kind of a castle or palace looking building. And we were trying to get to it. And when I did, I went inside, and the floor of this building had a very ornate mosaic tile pattern. And I had the intuition that if I did a somersault over a certain portion of this mosaic pattern, that I would fall through a trap door in the floor into a more secret chamber. And I didn't have a lot of recall of what occurred after that, but this was not the kind of dreams that I'd been accustomed to. I'd never had a dream like this. So it stuck in my mind. At the around the same time, I had purchased some books on Eckankar, but I had not yet read them. I was reading some books on Tibetan Buddhism and wanted to finish those up before I went on to read the Eckankar books. And I had kind of a strong intuition at one point to start reading one of the books on Eckankar. And in it, when I got a little way into the book, it described the dream experience that I had had. Not verbatim, but really close, close enough that I recognized that this was not just coincidence. And that made a big impression on me, you know. I'd also like to add, possibly I should have said this earlier, Eckankar does not purport to be like the one and only spiritual teaching that everyone should be doing. That is certainly not the case. There are tons of different approaches. I think the main thing for those interested is to find one that works for you, because we're all separate individuals with our own backgrounds, our own understandings, and you know, what works for me might not be the best one for somebody else, but this fit me well, and because of that, I've stuck with it through the years. Now I'm approaching 50 years as Eckankar, and I've never felt that I've gotten to a point where I had run out of things that I could learn. One of the key elements that I just like to mention is that while there is an outer organization of Eckankar, and there are books available and classes and so forth, the real focus and the real crux of the teaching is on personal spiritual experience. So, you know, you can read information, and that can be helpful for both inspiration and some type of guidance, I suppose. But what makes it real is when you experience it yourself. And the experiences that are available, not only to people in Eckankar, but to any human being, involve going within yourself to experience divine spirit or Holy Spirit, or whatever term you might use for that force that sustains everything that exists. You can experience this very directly within yourself. And the two elements, or the two aspects of spirit that can be perceived directly, are inner light and inner sound. And I think that many teachings, I know many teachings focus on the inner light and mention it and focus on, on that to a great extent. Fewer highlight the inner sound, but that is the other aspect of spirit that can be perceived directly. And the point in making this inner contact with spirit is that it is the repository of all wisdom. It is omniscient. And by having a direct experience with it, it can bring about really much more, I'd say, rapid changes or a more rapid unfoldment of consciousness than might be available to someone who has not learned these techniques or had other experiences. Now, I'm actually, Rich, I know from our discussion that your approach that you're currently following has to do with the three principles that were brought out by Sydney Banks. And I did watch a video presentation of Sydney Banks talking about his experience of enlightenment. And I was interested to see that there is a great deal of common ground between what he was talking about and what I've learned through Eckankar. So it's not that any one approach has a monopoly on this stuff. And that is as you would expect, because it's universal. We all have the potential for these experiences if we find a way to go about doing it. I'm going to pause there because you might, I don't know if you have some things that you'd like me to focus on or that you wanted to react to.
Well, I especially liked the point that you said that you look within, and that's something that Sid Banks always talks about is looking within, and that you'll find all of your answers within you, within that space of inner wisdom, of like you said, whatever you want to call it, you can have different labels, but it's all pointing to the same truth, the same universal intelligence, universal spirit, universal electricity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Something that this is quite a broad topic, and it's not always easy to think of the right sequence to bring up topics. They sort of come to mind. But a thing that I'd like to highlight is the idea and the reality of working with spiritual guides or teachers within oneself. So we, in the human form, are familiar with our physical bodies, and we no need to dwell on that. But that's not who we truly are. We are spiritual beings with physical bodies and with emotions and with mental faculties and emotional faculties. But the true self is not that. The true self is an eternal spiritual being. And in Eckankar and in many other teachings, a key focus is on experience that brings about a recognition of one's own divinity, one's own true spiritual nature.
Yeah.
And as we are, well, I'll say that the experiences in life are regarded as essentially a school that we go through lifetime after lifetime of various experiences in order to learn to give and accept love, and specifically divine love. And that is something that comes about through experience, but also more directly or in a more accelerated way through these experiences with divine spirit that I mentioned, the inner light and sound. But as we are, for the most part, folks who are here physically incarnated are still in school, still learning this kind of thing. There are beings who have been through enough of this process of spiritual enlightenment or education that they are now in a position to act as guides or teachers or inner masters for the benefit of others. And so I think this is common knowledge these days in our culture, the idea of inner guides, inner teachers. Some people call them guardian angels, a lot of different terminology. But the idea is that there are beings who can guide us and assist in our endeavors to learn, or I learn is maybe not quite the right term, but to open to spiritual reality. But it's important to, if one is interested in working with a guide, and if that guide is, I would say, legitimate and a true spiritual teacher, that guide will not impose on you.
Oh, yeah.
You have to make the invitation and then be open to it. If it seems too scary for you and you don't really, in some recess of your mind, feel comfortable with it, it's unlikely that an experience will come through for you, because you have to both invite the relationship and then be open to the relationship. And I know that there are lots and lots of people who are aware of their inner teachers or inner guides, and that is a key part of Eckankar. There is I'll be on a brief tangent here. I don't expect that anyone will necessarily accept everything I have to say. I don't encourage it. The information I can share is from my understanding and my experience. But until it's your experience, I don't think it's a good idea to accept it as truth. You might accept it as information that you can test on your own.
Pick it up.
Big friend?
Pick it up.
Yeah.
Pick it up, take a look at it.
Exactly.
And it's okay if it doesn't resonate with you now.
Perfectly okay. We're spirit is not in any rush. We are sometimes in the human state we worry about or are concerned about, am I making spiritual headway? Am I doing enough? And I think that's a reasonable perspective, but spirit doesn't care if it takes one lifetime or 100 lifetimes. It doesn't matter, you know. So we'll all attain spiritual realization at some point. That's the nature of life and the nature of who we are as spiritual beings, and the experiences that each of us have are unique to us. But so getting back to the point about the inner teachers, there is a order or group of inner teachers who are specifically focused on making these experiences of inner light and sound available. And in the 1960s, this is my understanding, they regarded the culture in the world to be at such a point that there were enough people who would benefit from learning about this, that these teachings were brought out openly, because prior to that they'd been on a more individual basis from one teacher to his group of students or whatever. So there is a spiritual leader of Eckankar who is neither worshipped nor deified, but is regarded as someone who has great insight. And actually, this individual can work with people both outwardly and inwardly. So his physical body is like our physical bodies, nothing special, but the being who is resident in that body has the capability to work with people if they are interested in that. And again, that's something that one would, I suspect, accept only if they have an experience with the person. I mean, that would make sense. So let's see where to go from here.
Well, I think too that there is that love, that spiritual divinity underneath, and we can cover it up. So in the principles understanding, you're covering it up by your own thinking. You're using the creative power of thought against yourself, and you're creating this fog or this layer over the top of your own knowing.
Yes.
And your own divinity, and that experience of divine love. And that there's not really, that there is guides in that you can help other people see it. You can trigger it, but it never comes it's not transactional.
No,
it never comes from one person, from teacher to student. Really, it's you're seeing it within yourself, and you wouldn't have those experiences, you wouldn't have that realization if you didn't see it within yourself. And so I don't know what it takes in order for that to happen. Maybe a little bit of the layers have to be peeled off. I don't know. Maybe it's that some people start to become attracted to it, because Sid Banks said that everybody is seeking enlightenment, whether they know it or not.
Right. I certainly agree with that.
Yeah.
That I didn't mention the name of the spiritual leader of Eckankar. That his name is Harold Klemp, and he resides in Minnesota. So just FYI. But one of the quotes that I like a lot from his writings is, "There is no limitation except for the limitations you have made for yourself." And it sounds like that's very consistent with perspective as well. We create these matrices, I suppose, of thought form, and then we live within those. We create identifications and essentially, I don't want to try to think the right way to say this. We get a perception of who and what we are, and that's molded, I would think, from, to a large extent, what others reflect back to us of their impressions, and then we accept those impressions as being, the parameters of ourself, and we have some idea of who and what ourself is. And it's, I'm not saying that that's not accurate to a degree, but it's not the true self, which is the spiritual being. So within the mental construct of what I would call maybe the little self are all kinds of limitations, of not being comfortable with going beyond what's already known and familiar. We don't have to get into all of the limitations, but the key here, and that, first of all, one thing I wanted to mention, I totally agree with you, is the process of enlightenment cannot be transmitted from like verbally or given to someone. It's an experience that the individual must have for himself or herself.
Yeah.
The guides can point the way and have insight into what might bring about an experience, and perhaps provide that kind of guidance to bring you to that point. But then it's up to the individual to take that step, and that's kind of one of the points that I'm referring to in these limitations that most people, I think, are burdened with. Our minds are very comfortable working in patterns and routines that are known, and are typically less comfortable in going beyond that. And to sort of take a step off into the deep end without quite understanding what might occur can take some practice and some nerve, but it's also something that can occur, I would say, for the individual through, well, in a sense, like through practice. I mean, by using spiritual techniques over a period of time, one can get more comfortable and more familiar with what to expect, and then the resistance to having those experiences can break down, because if you jump in the pool at 6 feet and it's okay, then maybe the next day you can go at 7 feet and find out, well, nothing really bad happened, and the metaphor could continue. But I do think, and this is a key thing that I consider to be very important. There are many different approaches to going within oneself. Different types of meditation, prayer. Some people get a lot out of reading scripture. The point that I think is key is that whatever one chooses or whatever one finds that works well for them, if you do it regularly, it's going to work out better for you. If you're trying to learn a musical instrument, let's say piano, and you sit down to practice once a month, you're not going to learn it very fast, because not only are you not putting in the time, but also through doing it, you learn nuances and techniques that cannot really be given to you. You learn them on your own, similarly to what we were saying about enlightenment not being available as a transmitted experience. One learns how to go about negotiating the inner side of things by being there and by doing it. And it's, well, I would, again, just say that whatever approach somebody uses, if it's done regularly, it tends to be more effective. I think at this point, if you're okay with it, I'll mention a technique that's used a lot in Eckankar, and it's
sure.
It's available to everybody. It's harmless. I think most people who would be interested in listening to this podcast have come across the idea of chanting, and specifically chanting Om, which is a syllable or a mantra that's used a great deal in Hinduism and in some of the other Eastern teachings. Another syllable that can be used, or another mantra, is the word Hu, which is spelled H-U, just pronounced like the color or the hue of a color, or the guy's name, Hugh. And the technique is very simple. It would involve going someplace where you're not likely to be disturbed for a little while, 10, 15 minutes. Sit comfortably with your eyes closed. If you like yogic positions, that's fine, but it's not necessary. Whatever's comfortable is great. You would just close your eyes and then sing or chant this syllable, this word hue. When I do it, it sounds like this. It would go, you, long drawn out vocal expression. And you do that for as long as you feel like it, but if you did it for 3 to 5 minutes, that would be plenty. It doesn't even have to be that long. But you would. This is a way of harmonizing your personal vibration, because we all have a vibratory rate. This singing or chanting of mantric syllables can serve to harmonize your personal vibration with that of that particular syllable, which different syllables or different mantras derive from different planes or levels of the inner worlds. And so chanting hue for a little while, and then continue to sit with your eyes closed, and you may see some light on the inner screen of your mind at the point between the eyebrows, known as the third eye. Mm-hmm. That can come through as little flashes of light or a prevalent color or other ways, but it's an inner light, nothing to do with your physical eyes. And then similarly, there can be an inner sound, which is not coming from the environment or through your physical ears, and it can take different forms or different, it can sound similar to a high-pitched ringing in your ears, not tinnitus, but it's like an electrical hum. It's not coming, like if you plug your ears, you'd still hear it. It could also sound similar to different sounds of nature or musical sounds. But these are ways that one can make direct contact with spirit and in a conscious way. And if you succeed in, and it may or may not happen the very first time you try it. So if this is of interest, it's something that you could try over time. But if you get to the point where you're able to tune in to these two aspects of spirit, you sort of had an intuition, or it would come upon you in my experience of how to work with it and how to try to open yourself to it to a greater extent and to experience it more completely or more directly, essentially to sort of follow it toward its source, which is the Godhead. So this is something that is a key aspect of Eckankar, is these inner experiences of light and sound.
And it's kind of interesting because the principles is kind of goes about it in a different way. There's not really a practice. I told you last time that they had a book. Michael Neal showed us this book that a principles practitioner made that was the techniques of the principles, and then it was blank. It was
okay. Yeah. Right.
And it's a little bit different because it's not a technique to get to the source. It's more kind of in the moment experience. It's more of an understanding of the principles are really just kind of a description of what's already there. It's the description of the mind, consciousness, and thought that make up our reality. And it's cool if you can find like a doorway through a practice. And for me, it's because I tried a lot of different practices, and it like you said, wow, this resonates with me. I experienced this. And I tried a lot of different practices, and I didn't really get what I was looking for from it. And it's been this understanding that has given me the peace that I am so at peace up here. And because it's kind of ironic because you're not trying to get rid of thoughts, but it's almost like a secondary benefit.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And like we said earlier, there are so many different approaches because they all work for somebody.
Yeah.
They wouldn't exist.
Thank goodness.
Right? One of the things that I was taking some notes from the video of Sydney Banks talking about his enlightenment experience. And one of the points that I wrote down which I liked a lot, was you have to find your own switch to put that light on. Light is that white light I was talking about.
Yeah.
So whatever approach is right for you, it's great.
Yeah.
There was I don't know, man, I'm dating myself, I'm sure, but there was a John Lennon song, "Whatever gets you through the night, it's all right." And this was one of his solo songs, and one of the lyrics is, "Whatever gets you to the light, it's all right." You know, and I think that is, I think that's important and true. Here's another element that we haven't talked about yet. Another aspect of the Eckankar teachings is a focus on dreams, because dreams can be a very valuable approach, very productive approach to spiritual enlightenment. Obviously, there are many kinds of dreams. I think our English language is a little deficient, because anything that happens while you're sleeping, any experience you might have, is all called a dream. But there are different kinds of dreams. I sometimes mention to folks, when at one point in my younger days, I had a job at the Pizza Hut, and I made pizzas for a living. So I'd have a 10-hour shift of making pizzas. Then I'd go home and go to bed, and I'd make pizzas for the rest of the night, because it was such repetitive activity that it was just ingrained in my mind, and I would continue to have that. So I didn't consider those to be particularly significant dreams. On the other hand, there are dreams there are dreams that give some kind of premonition of the future. There can be dreams giving insight into past lives or what's going on in the current life. And there can also be dreams where you work with your inner guide. So Eckankar does have quite a direct focus, not only on outer spiritual practices, but also on paying attention to one's dreams. When the conscious mind is asleep, I'll say when it's active, when it's alert or awake, it has kind of a censor function. It tends to reject information that would oblige it to make big changes. But when the individual is sleeping, that censor is not really on guard to the same extent. And the dreams that can come through can be very direct. They can also be very confusing, because one's own higher self, one's, the divine you, may wish to bring insights out to the conscious mind, and can do so in dreams. But in order to avoid this censor function, the information or the insights that are being, I would say, brought out are sometimes scrambled. So they're hard to understand. There are symbols that might not be clear, but and not everybody has good recall of dreams. So it's very, it's whatever fits the individual. But for those who are interested in dreams, and I know a lot of people are, and maybe do have good recall, keeping a journal of your dreams can be very effective, because you can start to find repeating symbols. You can go to any bookstore and get a book of 1,000 dream symbols interpreted and so forth. And those might be accurate, but they might not, because it's not the case that each symbol is the same, or the meaning of each symbol is the same for everybody. But if you start to see symbols in your own dreams that repeat, you can sort of crack the code, like in wartime when they intercept enemy messages. And if the same word comes up, the coded word comes up over and over, they can start to crack the code. And the same is true of dreams. So just wanted to bring that up, that is another aspect.
And kind of what my thoughts on that would be that they're kind of like tea leaves, in that you can have your intuition, your inner wisdom tell you what comes of that, but you could also kind of go down a rabbit hole too, I think. And and this brings up another thought, that a lot of what Sid talked about was that there was a realization that there was one thought, and he said that mental stability, peace of mind, is one thought away from everyone on Earth, and it's either a million miles away or it's right next to you in the next second, and it's the right thought. And so it's kind of fun. It's like finding the right thought, and it's not something that you can do with your intellectual mind.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say, okay, I'm having my one thought. It comes from that inner space of wisdom from within.
Right.
And that he had one thought, and those three principles came to him. And it's for me, it's happened a little bit differently. It's happened more in smaller increments, where I've had realizations, especially in my relationship. It's been, yeah. And one of the thoughts didn't have any words with it. It doesn't have to have words. It can come from that wisdom, and that wisdom speaks to you sometimes with no words, even with a feeling.
It's interesting to me that you bring that up, because that's been perspective or insight that I've had as well, that when conscious thought occurs, it's typically expressed in the language that you use, whether it's English or, I'm sure, I don't have to say I'm sure, I know that it's, if you speak another language, your thought comes through in that language. But before it gets to the point of being crystallized into verbal expression, into words, there is I don't know what to say, like a prototype thought, or an earlier, less formed thought that then is expressed into words. And I found that trying to get comfortable with working at that level of not depending on verbal thought is a higher aspect of mental activity. I find, or I regard it as that. You had said something else that now it's escaped me. I know what it was. So
yeah,
well, another thing that was in the Sydney Banks video had to do with wisdom doesn't enter, it unfolds, not outside in, but inside out.
Yes.
And he says, you find something that you already have. And that's also common to Eckankar, is that we're already spiritual beings. We don't have to become something that we're not now. In like just in discussion or conversation, it's not uncommon to hear someone say, oh, so-and-so is very spiritual, or, oh, I'm not spiritual. Well, in fact, everybody is 100% spiritual. It's the degree of recognition varies with the individual, but it's not like it's reserved for certain people, or someone who's, high up in some religious order is more spiritual than anybody else. We're all 100% spiritual. And that recognition, I'm trying to think how to say this, and I may be going down a little tangent, but it occurs if one has the idea that it's necessary to get to something or get to a state of awareness that you don't already have access to, then you've allowed for a gap that cannot be crossed. And so here's an illustration that I sometimes use when I'm talking to people. I don't know how many people remember high school math. I don't remember everything about it, but I remember taking it, and I remember some of it. So I think it's trigonometry. I don't know for sure, but there was a concept of an asymptote, which is a curved line if you had an XY grid, and the curved line approaches the axis but never gets to the axis. It gets
Oh,
infinitesimally closer and closer to the
yeah.
axis, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
never intersects the axis. I remember when I was in math class, I was thinking, oh, what the hell do you need this for? What is the purpose of learning this particular piece of information? But I think it has spiritual applicability in that if you think that you're on this curve of approaching something, as long as you're approaching it, you're not there. And there was a, just to dwell on this a little bit longer, there was a Greek philosopher who was not one of the better known ones, but his name was Zeno, Zeno.
Mm-hmm.
And he had illustrations or little parables that seemed to render impossible certain physical observable events. So here's the example. So he said that if an archer shoots an arrow at a target, the arrow can never reach the target. And the reason for this is that in order to get from the archer to the target, it first has to go through half the distance. But before it can go through half the distance, it has to go through a quarter of the distance. And before it can go through a quarter, it has to go through an eighth of the distance. And it keeps going to infinity. In order to get to any place, it has to get through half of the place, and you can subdivide that half distance as many times as you want. So he said the arrow can never reach the target. Well, in observable three-dimensional life, obviously that's not true. You can shoot an arrow at a target and it can get there, but in the inner experience, if you accept that there is some distance in between you and your objective, you can never get through that distance because you've accepted that there is a gap. So I just thought that's sort of an interesting thing. And so the key point here is that, as you mentioned, the experiences of spirit they don't occur in time or space. They are above or beyond time and space. And to access them, it can seem to take time and practice to get to the point where those experiences are available to one, but that's because it takes a certain amount of time, I suppose, to release oneself from self-imposed limitation and allow those experiences to become manifest in one's own consciousness.
Well, it's as far away or as close as when he said that it's 1,000,000 miles away or it's 2 seconds away or even less than that. He means that because it's made of thinking, it's made of thought, that those self-imposed limitations are either solid and they're something that we hold on to, and we can do that for the rest of our lives, or they can dissipate and immediately be released through a single realization because they're made from thinking. And thinking doesn't follow the same rules as the real world, as the arrows, as the coffee cups. It doesn't follow the same rules. And so when you realize that there's no gap, then you're already there. And but the thing is, you've always been there.
Exactly.
You've just put the gap there with the power of your own creative thought.
Yeah. It's like waking up to something that already exists.
Yeah.
Actually, here's another little note that I took from the Sid Banks video. He says, it's not personal. We're talking about a spiritual essence that lies deep within the soul of everybody on earth.
Yeah.
Clear your mind to let the wisdom in. And that is totally consistent with Eckankar as well.
Yeah. And I think I told you last time about a feeling too, that there's a feeling that comes along with this. It's so fascinating that you have the light and sound, and for the principles, there's this feeling that comes up I see it as feeling that comes from that mind. By mind I mean the universal intelligence, the electrifying force. There's a feeling that comes from that,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't describe it. Like it's very difficult to describe, but it's there, and when I try to talk about the principles, it sometimes comes and sometimes not. So,
Yeah. I think if I'm grasping what you're referring to, for me, it's like a vast expansion of consciousness.
mm,
It's no longer being identified with the limited self, but being identified, allowing myself to recognize that I'm one with spirit. And like you say, you can't really put it into words, but it does. One way that it sometimes comes through is it just feels like, wow, I'm like a lot bigger than I thought. You know?
yeah.
Yeah.
But for me, sometimes it's just this breakthrough of jubilation and joy, and just
Yeah.
like and when it comes, I'm grateful, and it doesn't always come. It seems
Yeah.
to be come with maybe certain thoughts, and that's how we really know that you're. I will say this again and again, because on repeat, because you can use your thoughts as a guide
Connection.
now,
Mm-hmm.
because when it feels bad, when it feels bad emotionally, that's one of your guides that telling you that your thinking is off,
Yes.
that you're not connected with that wisdom, that you're covering it up like ice or fog with your own personal wisdom. And so you don't have to banish thoughts. You can let them. They're gonna go on their own if you let them.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, something you just mentioned brings to mind another point regarding these inner teachers or guides,
Mm-hmm.
and that is that if if you are relating, if an individual is relating to an inner teacher or guide, the guidance will never be negative. It will never be harmful to you
Yeah.
or anyone else. And if you're getting that kind of inner message, it's good to take a hard look at that, because that's not coming from a real spiritual teacher.
Yeah. If it feels horrible,
Yeah.
that it's your thinking. So
Yeah.
you might be having some really terrible thoughts, but it's not the external situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's your thinking, and you're not connected with your inner guidance.
Yes. Right. Um, I guess I don't know how much more time we have, but I'll mention a couple of things uh,
Sure.
for anyone who might be interested in Eckankar. And I'll say once again that it's not um, a teaching that tries to push itself on anyone. It is available. If people are interested, they can check it out. If it fits them, they can go as far with it as they wish. They can cease involvement at any point. And so, just to bring that out. But there is an organization associated with it, and for anyone who wants to know more about that, I think um, I think on your podcast, or when you put this up, you'll have a website which I'm
Yeah.
going to send to you,
Mm-hmm.
where people can follow up if they choose. We do have a lot of activities, or several things going on in northern Colorado. I'm particularly active in the Loveland area, but there's another small group of folks in Longmont, and in Denver. We actually have one of only a relatively few temples that exist in the United States. So that's in the Denver area, and uh, the website that you'll put up after I send it to you does give information about all the available activities that people can check out if they wish. Um, And so anyone is welcome, and no one will try to push it on you.
So it's important to find the space and have that safe space for any place that you would go to. I think a lot of people have found that some traditional churches and are not the safe space that they want, and maybe some are, and people love that, and that's beautiful, and maybe they'll find that safe space in that community with other people, with Eckankar or the principles, or I love that there's so many options for finding something new, and what I suggest to our listeners is to really explore.
Yeah.
Because you never know what's around the corner, and you never know what will be your new home. And you'll never know when you have that next thought or the next community that will be there for you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Once again, it's not one size fits all. It's find something that works for you.
Yeah. And I think that we're seeing people value this. They're looking for this.
Yeah.
More and more, because they're seeing through their lives, and they're seeing through that something needs to change.
Yes.
And they have it within them already, and we would love to point that out and show and just be like, it's right here. It's
I know.
There's the pot of gold. It's not at the end of the rainbow. It's right here. You already have it.
Right. It's striking to me anyway that how our culture has evolved, our Western culture, U.S. American culture, in the last 40 or 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the 1960s, this stuff was weird. You know, the idea of going within oneself, the idea, let's say, of reincarnation. These were foreign concepts, and people just thought, not everybody, obviously, but it was not widely accepted. And that has changed a great deal, to the point where I actually had an opportunity on the last job that I had. The Human Resources Department was promoting, or they organized different little workshops, and they had one on health and nutrition and exercise and so forth, and they wanted to do one on mindfulness. And I said, well, I could lead that because I know something about that.
Yeah.
I actually didn't really know the exact definition of mindfulness, but I knew it had something to do with going within oneself. So I felt like I was pretty comfortable with it. So I put together a little presentation, and it was an opportunity to share some perspectives with people, which I enjoyed. But in it, I was just making kind of the point of how our culture has changed. And there were little cartoons that I had. That this isn't crucial information, but they were depicting people chanting or Om, and in the earlier phase, like 30, 40 years ago, it was like gurus sitting on mountaintops, and then more recently, it's been like a guy who was clearly a computer scientist because he was at a computer and had glasses, and it was .om instead of .com, and there were cows that some were chanting Om and some were chanting Moo. You know, so in other words, it's so common in the culture that these kinds of references, people get that now. It's like information that's not strange to them. And I think that's a great thing. It just goes to show that there is advancement of understanding, and I'm all about that.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to bring our conversation to a beautiful end.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
A momentary end. I'm sure we'll converse in the future.
I certainly hope so. And once again, I really appreciate your invitation to be on this podcast. Hopefully some of the things we talked about will have some value for folks, and
Yeah.
they can decide that and take it to whatever step they wish.
Yeah.
So,
beautiful. Thank you.
All right, Rich. Thanks a million. I really appreciate it. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Rich Life Realization Podcast. May these conversations help you experience your richest life. To contact me about being a guest on the podcast or about coaching, email me richliferealization@gmail.com or text or call 970-716-0075.